In an article from the Education Initiative data, Melanie Hansen writes, quote, "The average cost of college and tuition and fees at public four-year institutions has risen 179.2% over the last 20 years, end quote. That's as of 2022. That's an average of 9% every single year. That means that the rising cost of tuition outpaces inflation by 171.5%. What does this mean? It means that a high school senior today has to come up with $10,000 to pay for just their first of 8 semesters, whereas someone at the turn of the century only had to come up with $3,500. That means that for a lot of students, it puts into question the validity of going into their second step of their education. For a lot of students, it doesn't get to be a question. For a lot of students, they don't get to go to college at all. My name is Phillip Baggerman, and I know firsthand experience about the expense of college. I myself am a high school senior who's having to come up with that $10,000 to pay for my first semester. And this matters to you because whether you're a senior or not yet, eventually you're going to have to come up with that $10,000 to pay for just your first semester. These increases in prices matter to you because you're going to have to pay them. In fact, they matter to everyone who pays taxes, but I'll get more into that later. For now though, know this. The ridiculous increase in college tuition is a problem, but I believe it can be helped through an increase in government regulation, and I'm going to prove that to you today by showing you what our society would look like with and without my solution. So let's start by examining the problem. As I previously stated, the stats show that tuition has gone up at an alarming rate. In fact, according to that same article by Melanie Hansen, it's gone up 130% since 1990 after correcting for inflation. The nominal amount you had to pay for a semester in the 1960s was only $200. And while it's obvious that inflation is a major factor in that, it's still crazy to think about the fact that someone in the 1960s only had to pay $200 to go to college. So this massive increase in price causes 2 main problems. The first is that it increases our government's debt, and the second is that it discourages poorer students from attending college. So let's start with the former. And this is actually the reason why I said earlier that it affects everyone that pays taxes. It increases the government debt. So our government knows that not everyone can come up with $10,000 out of thin air. I mean, that's a lot of money. So they do something called financial aid. And through systems like FAFSA, they give money to students that need the help. And so they do this through 2 main mechanisms. The first is student loans, and the second is financial grants. So student loans are exactly what they sound like. They're just loans given by the government, and you have to pay them back after you've finished your education. But student grants are a little bit different. They're just free money. Now, according to a website, Statistica, which has been updated recently enough to show the statistics from last school year, the government has spent a lot more money on student grants than they have in the past. In fact, if you put a graph of the two of student grants and student tuition next to each other, they look almost identical. Now, if you think about it, this makes sense, right? The more colleges charge, the more help students need, and the more help the government is inclined to give. But this kind of raises a problem, and that's that the colleges aren't charging the students anymore, they're charging the government. And the government has infinite money, but they don't really. They'll keep paying, they'll keep increasing their debt, but we're already $30 trillion in debt, and spending so much more on college grants every single year isn't going to help with that. In fact, according to that Statistica website, in 2020, the government spent over $160 billion on government grants alone, when just 17 years prior, they spent less than half of that. Colleges can keep charging as much as they want because the government will keep paying it, but the government's just going to increase their debt. And another thing this does is it increases taxes. That money doesn't come from nowhere. It does increase the debt, but they're going to try and get rid of that debt by charging more and more in taxes. And that's just student grants. I completely ignored the fact that student loans exist too. And while student loans place less of a burden on the government, they place an even greater burden on people who went to college. An article titled Student Loan Statistics that was written by Matt Schlutz said, in total, Americans owe $1.77 trillion in student debt. To put that into perspective, I almost rounded that down to 1.75 trillion just to make it a prettier number, but then I realized that that's $20 billion I'd be getting rid of, so I figured I'd keep it at 1.77. So the higher the schools hike up their prices, the more that student debt will increase, the more debt the government is going to be in, and the more our taxes will increase. So you're like, okay, cool, Philip. We've got the problem economically, we've got the problem with our government debt, but what about anything else? I mean, sure, that's a problem, but still, colleges need money. Well, the other problem with increasing tuition is that it discourages poor high schoolers from going to college. While financial aid does exist, think about someone who maybe doesn't have a lot of money, and they see that price tag at the start. and they just are like, no, I can't do that. I mean, that's an understandable decision to make. But what happens is that means that talented, smart, young minds aren't able to go on to their second education just because of the price. They have everything they need except for the money. And these problems don't just affect everyone else, they affect you. Over the next few years, you'll have to come up with $100,000 if you go to a major university just to pay for your college. And after that, you'll continue to have to pay taxes that will increase more and more because of these college tuitions. There is a solution to this problem, though. The government needs to put a cap on the amount colleges can charge their students. If they did this, then colleges wouldn't be able to charge unfair amounts to their students. According to an article done by Student Debt, this is actually already happening. It's titled, What Can Be Done About Rising College Prices? And it says, in many states, lawmakers already require that public colleges and universities set tuition at or below certain levels. They may also restrict how much colleges can raise tuition each year. Now, this is a good start, but it's still only at the state level. If we want to see real change, federal action needs to be taken. And a cap would also only work if it's placed over all the prices that are charged. The cap right now is mainly only placed on tuition, and colleges can get around that by charging more for rooms or certain classes. The cap needs to be placed over the total amount that students have to spend. Now, some might say that this solution violates the rights of colleges, especially private colleges. After all, aren't colleges separate from the government? Like, especially private colleges, they shouldn't be regulated by the government. They're their own private entity. Now, I'd love to agree with that, but the sad case is that just isn't true in our government. We aren't a fully capitalist society. And a really big example of this is minimum wage. Before 1938, when minimum wage was introduced, there was a lot of exploitation. Lots of people were working for like way too low wages, and so the government had to come in and protect the rights of its citizens by setting them a minimum wage that private institutions unrelated to the government had to pay. They need to do the same thing here and protect the rights of their students. The exploitation of their students is happening because of these colleges, and they need to protect them. So with this solution, student debt would decrease. The government wouldn't have to pay over $100 billion every year, and impoverished students would be more likely to further their education. Without this solution, student debt would continue to rise. The government debt would increase, and in 6 years, they would be projecting to spend over $1 trillion on student grants. And intelligent minds that have everything they need to thrive in colleges, except for the money, would never get to walk the stage at their college graduation. So today, I discussed the problem of rising college prices. I gave a solution of putting the cap on college prices and explained what it would look like if the government did or didn't do my solution. It's clear what needs to happen. If we want it to change, though, we have to fight for it. Speak out against unfair prices. Post on social media. A good way to make change is to talk to your senators. They're the ones that vote for us. If you want to contact the Texas senators, you can do it at www.cornyn.senate.gov/shareopinion, or you can do it at cruise.senate.gov/contact/write10. Tell them that we won't stand for these greedy colleges. It's the only way. Together, our voices can be heard, and we can make a difference.